If your parents don't care and can't respect our time and come to a parent-teacher conference, then I cannot help you. This is what my high school teacher said to me. I am going to tell you about one of my parents whom my high school teacher assumed did not care about my education. But in fact, it had always been my mother's dream for my sisters and I to attend college. My mother grew up in a small town in the eastern mountains of Ghana in the early 60s. She was one of 6 children of a self-made man in Koforidua. My grandfather worked hard and was proud of all his accomplishments. He built this beautiful, pink, multi-story home at the foothills of the mountains, and he unapologetically named it Ankonam Lodge, which loosely translates to, I am a loner, and I did it all by myself. My grandfather loved all his children and his grandchildren. And as a child, I witnessed this when we gathered around his house around the holidays. He beamed with joy as he served us chocolate drinks and those Danish butter cookies, the ones that came in the blue metal cans. But about the age of 9, I began to notice and wonder why all my uncles had an excellent education, my mother did not. I was shocked when my mother told me why. My mother was terrified to tell her father that she wanted to become a nurse. She said, you know, girls like me were told that we were not intelligent to go past middle school. And from everything I saw around me, I believed it. I had no one to advocate for me. When I dared ask my father that I wanted to take the exam that would allow me to attend high school and become a nurse, he said, nursing is not a good profession. You're going to contract a disease. You know, you should become a seamstress. I see that you're very good at mending clothes. And you know, in a few years, you're going to get married anyway. My mother knew her father loved her, and she knew he had the money to pay for her education. He just didn't believe that she deserved that education. My grandfather was a well-meaning man, and he believed he was giving all his children the appropriate education that they needed. He just didn't understand the message of Dr. Kwejuri Agri, a Ghanaian educator who was a strong advocate for the education of girls in Ghana. I'm sure many of you have heard one of his famous quotes. It says, if you educate a man, you educate an individual. But if you educate a woman, you educate a nation. Growing up, my mother used to say, you know, God has a good sense of humor because he blessed me with 3 daughters so that I can empower them to pursue what was taken from me. My mother taught us how to be kind, appreciative, empathetic. She taught us how to persevere when we felt short of our goals. Although sometimes she was a little optimistic. Like when I told her I'd been accepted into the PhD program at Curry, she quickly changed my contact information in her phone to say Dr. Kayser. Talk about pressure. One of the lessons that my mother taught me that stayed with me was about equality and fairness. When we were younger, and Ma, as we so affectionately called her, would give us something to share. Often it was treat, like food. She would ask one of us to share, and she would say, your child, no feature. The person who divides picks last. The sibling who was in charge of dividing up the treat had to carefully consider how they would feel if they got the last treat. And as a child, it was easy to divide treats up this way. But as I got older, I began to see that dividing up treats this way was a good way for food. But equality was actually a very complicated issue. That it was a good start, but not enough. My mother's lessons was also about empathy, the ability to see the perspectives of others. Growing up in a house with 2 sisters, there was always some kind of commotion in the house. Whenever we fought or wronged each other, my mother would call us over, have us sit down, and she would look at all three of us, hear our stories, and she would say, Wo niadio san kebeode. Wo niadio san kebeode. If you were in that person's shoes, will you be happy with that outcome? My mother's lessons about empathy helped me understand why that high school teacher's remarks were totally mistaken. See, what that high school teacher lacked was knowledge about my family and our history. She didn't know the sacrifices my parents had made in Ghana and in the US to meet our most basic needs. My father was a custodian, a bellhop, and a dishwasher. My mother was a meat slicer at a grocery store, and she was a cashier at a sandwich shop. They were anything but disengaged, but she stereotyped them. Often as a teacher, I get stereotyped. Sometimes parents and visitors will walk in my classroom and walk past me and walk straight to my white teaching assistant, assuming that she's the teacher. Perhaps in their minds, there's no way that I, a black woman, could be the teacher. When they realize that I'm the teacher, I'm often drilled on my credentials. These conversations start with, so how long have you been teaching? To where did you go to school? When I say UVA, they say, oh wow, with a bachelor's, and I add, and a master's. Some even push a bit further and say, I sense an accent. Where are you from? And I would say, Ghana. And they'll say, oh wow, you speak very good English to be from Africa, or you're very articulate. Throughout all these stereotypes and microaggressions, I continue to hear my mother's voice telling me to persevere. And because of this, I continue to advocate for all families and children, especially the ones who are recent immigrants in the US. Here are some things I do to support my families. Home visits work wonders. Pairs of teachers visit the homes of students, and we listen to families share their aspirations for their children. We share about our personal and professional backgrounds, and sometimes we begin to form goals for students. These home visits serve as a springboard to invite families into my classroom. Once a month, parents come in to celebrate their children's growth. I also hold student-led conferences. And with these conferences, students sit at the head of the table, and I sit next to the parents. And this subtle shift in our seating reinforces my idea that parents and teachers should be seen as partners. On Fridays, I have my students draw and write letters home and share with their families what they're doing. And they bring it back on Mondays during our morning meetings to share with their classmates and for students to learn about each other. And finally, when parents want to volunteer in my class, I do not limit them to times that work for me. Rather, I allow them to pick times that work for them because I want them to understand that their voices matter and that they can make a contribution to my classroom. I have colleagues who address biases in their classroom as well. One fourth grade teacher noticed that in the fourth grade science SOL, all the inventors that were listed were white men. The SOL stated, Benjamin Franklin, Michael Faraday, and Thomas Edison made important contributions to electricity, which is true. But she also knew about the story of an African-American man, Louis Latimer, and how his patented carbon filament made the incandescent light bulb more practical and affordable for the average household. She shared this with her students, and together they wrote a letter to the librarian asking for more books on inventors of color. See, what that teacher did was reshaped the standards in the curriculum, and what it did for her student was that it expanded their understanding of who inventors could be, and she taught them how to take social action by writing that letter. After the events of August 12 in Charlottesville, another teacher noticed that her kids playing at recess were playing tag, but this time it was different. The students were saying, the KKK is coming to get you. This teacher knew she had to do something about it, and it had to be done now when her kids were still young. She had a discussion in class about identity and differences. One boy said, well, If I think I'm better than somebody in my head and I don't share with anyone, then I'm not hurting anyone. This teacher knew that that could be a little problematic, so she addressed it. She read Julius Lester's book on Let's Talk About Race and had an open conversation with her students about differences and that it was okay to be different. But we have to remember that just being different doesn't mean that you're better than one person is better than the other. When I invite families into my classroom, it helps me address my biases and the stereotypes that I may have for families because I get to learn about who they are and learn how they can contribute to my classroom community. My mother addressed stereotypes on our behalf. And as I leave the stage, I want to share with you that my grandfather, at the end of his life, he realized his mistaken bias. My mother said he never outright came out to apologize. When he was sick, she took care of him, and he said, you know, if I knew you were going to be the one taking care of me, I would have never stopped you from becoming a nurse. My mother actively addressed stereotypes and biases on our behalf. She changed the narrative for her daughters because of her actions and beliefs. And as a teacher, I try to implement the lessons she taught me. As I leave the stage, I want you to consider the lessons on empathy and on fairness. I will always accept her challenge, and I hope you will too. Ma Medase. Thank you, Mom, and thank you all.